everyone, it's Hannah with 4AR People with Jenny as well, and we're here to talk about week 9 of the legislative session here in Arkansas.
Hey guys. Well, we had a lot happen this week.
Yeah, we had a lot. I think we're gonna start with the LEARNS Act. It's passed, it's been signed. We'll see what happens to public education in our state in the next few years, I guess. But before it officially was signed and passed through, the Senate had a committee meeting to concur the amendment that was put on by the House of standard practice. And on Monday is the day that they held the meeting, and it was after the Senate session, which so I think they started around like 3:30, 4. And keep in mind, every other meeting that they've had about this has been during the day on like a weekday. So on Monday, some students from Central High got together and came to speak against LEARNS. And again, this is the first time that they've had an opportunity to come sit in front of the legislature and voice their personal opinions about this bill that's going to affect their education. And great, we love to see students getting involved. Before Monday, I believe it was the Thursday last week, they held a walkout in protest to LEARNS, and they had over 1,000 kids walk out. That is incredible. Just before we even get to the rest, like, I just want to really shout that out, because I know that that's a lot of hard work. Organizing is not easy, and I think it just goes to show how much these kids really do care about their own education and their friends' education and all of the things, and their teachers too, because teachers are going to be really affected by this. So good job, Little Rock Central.
Go Tigers.
Yeah, go Tigers. But anyway, Monday, these students came, they had prepared speeches. I think I saw one of them tweet something about they were there practicing beforehand. They were all very excited. And then they get up to speak when it's time, and they are shut down, completely shut down every time. Every student, and I want to commend them so much, because they didn't stop. After the first one, after the second one, after the third, they kept getting up and they kept trying. And that, I can't imagine how hard that was. I have a lot of anxiety. I could not have done that after watching like my peers being turned away, and the way that they were turned away. They had limited testimony to 2 minutes. So not only were they being like interrupted, their 2 minutes was being taken up by the chair, Senator Jane English, who consistently was like, speak on the amendment, speak on the amendment. And what they didn't expect were for these kids to actually know how to pivot and start speaking on the amendment. And I don't think they liked it, because they continued to shut it down.
Shout out to public schools for doing those kids right.
Yes. And I also just, that in and of itself is bad. But the rhetoric behind, like, I saw a lot of adults on like Twitter and Facebook talking about how like there's absolutely no way that these kids could understand this bill. Like, there's no way that they could read it and know, like, whatever that argument was, it's not a good argument. Because they were well prepared to speak on the bill. They knew like the arguments, they had everything ready, and I guarantee you there was not a teacher telling them what to say.
That's interesting too, because they got a lot of attention, rightfully so, from the media, one after the walkout, and then two after this happened in Senate committee, and some proponents for school choice, some really lobbyists who are loud and noisy on social media. and like to shut down any kind of opposition to school choice. This one person in particular said, hey, these students are pawns. They're being used as political pawns. And it was very clear from their testimony and from their organization, their organizational skills and getting one another there and preparing and not being led there by someone else, or, you know, like we kind of saw with Learn's supporters, where these kids were kind of dragged from Siloam Springs and they just showed up and they sat down and they were like, oh, what do you want me to say? They were there on their own accord, from their own initiative, and showed a lot of moxie. And to your point, Hannah, like could pivot. And if the chair said something, they would address that and change their statements and try to tailor it to be compliant. And then they had a protest on the Capitol, right, on Wednesday too. Mm-hmm. And all of that just demonstrates that they are definitely not pawns. They're anything but. They're budding political activists. And in some sense, I think like maybe the other side is just upset that they don't have young people vigorously excited about school choice the way that these young kids are excited about protecting public schools.
Right. And I do want to mention that yesterday when the bill was signed by the governor, there were elementary students lined in the rotunda during school hours. And I don't think an elementary student understands the gravity of Learns. Completely different than a high school student. So if we want to talk about pawns and using kids as pawns, I think we should talk to the governor.
I hope their school policy allowed for them to take time off from school.
I'm sure it did. It was a private school.
They can do whatever they want. It's fine.
Yeah, they have no structure. It just, Anyway, we'll play a couple of videos of some of their testimonies, just so that you can kind of hear Senator Jane English really going in on these kids. At one point, she kind of made a roundabout comment about how you don't get to decide, we do as a committee. And, I kind of I understand that thought, but also these are the people who this bill is going to directly impact.
And future voters. Ooh.
These are future voters. I think there were sophomore to senior, maybe some freshmen. But those seniors are going to vote.
Yes, they are.
Pretty soon. So I don't know. It's just, it's really disheartening to see our legislature treat kids who are actually involved in the process this way, because this kind of attitude is what keeps people from being involved in the first place. And a lot of these kids, this was probably their first time coming to the Capitol during a legislative session and speaking their mind on something that they very passionate about. And I don't know, it was heartbreaking. I'm sure that they felt disheartened, but I hope that maybe disheartened for a couple minutes, because they came back and rallied 2 days later. So literally rallied and had a pretty good turnout. Yeah. I didn't go just because I was tired. But from what I saw online, it looked like a really good turnout. I went to a rally a couple weeks ago, and the turnout for these students was at least double the turnout for this other rally, which was organized by organizations in Arkansas. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, good job, Little Rock Central High students.
Time for a legislative rewind. These are just two of the several students who came to speak against the Learns Act. Now let's listen to how Senator Jane English treats them.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ethan Walker, and I'm a junior at Little Rock Central High, and I'm here to speak about the amendments and how they do not go far enough to tear down and decimate.
No, you only get to speak on the words that are in here. I'm sorry, but you only get to talk about these words, not what you'd like to see as an amendment, but what is in the amendment. That's all you get to talk about.
I am speaking on the amendments that are in the packet.
Do you have words on this amendment?
Yes.
So if you can go through here and talk about the things that you're seeing in this amendment that need to be changed or that you don't agree with, that's what we have to do today.
Yes, ma'am. I feel that it's pretty apparent now that...
So if you got the
Yes.
amendment and you're going through the amendment to
Going through the
determine,
amendment.
yeah, that's what you have to do, is go through the amendment and tell us those things in the amendment that you disagree with.
So I think it's, again, pretty apparent that these amendments just don't really address what's wrong with the bill. And I'm not talking about the bill, I'm talking about these amendments. Because I have looked through these amendments, but these amendments just do not do enough. And I think that's what we all need to understand here, is that like these petty little wording rearrangements, it doesn't work. It doesn't
Okay,
help.
thank you very
and it doesn't
much.
do anything to actually address how bad this bill is.
Thank you.
My name is Roan Kuda. I'm part of Central High. I'm a sophomore, and I'd like to speak on the amendments and the insufficiency of these amendments, but I will address the amendments directly. There's an amendment that says page 90, line 3, delete quote and substitute quote or. The reason I believe this amendment is bad is because it should actually say we are deleting the voucher program on section 63 because the voucher program absolutely reallocates resources from the working class Americans and Arkansans and reallocates that to the Arkansan upper class.
Thank you. Appreciate your willingness to come.
On page 95, delete line 21 and substitute the following. B1, public school district or open enrollment public charter school located in the state of Arkansas. That should actually say we are removing section 16 because indoctrination causes is the unprecedented censorship of certain groups that exist in this country.
That you're not speaking on this amendment. You're speaking on the bill. So
I'm speaking on the insufficiency of these amendments as it relates to the bill.
That's not what we're here to do.
I think it is, though. These amendments relate to the bill, don't they? Are they just amendments are these words not in reference to the bill? Senate Bill 294? They are, and they're insufficient.
Well, that remains to be seen, but these are the words. This is what is going to be in amendment to the, and that's what we're voting on, are these words. So this committee will vote to determine whether or not we accept these amendments as they are, or we do not accept those amendments. So we're giving you the opportunity.
And isn't it very relevant to the conversation if the amendments are sufficient or not? If you're going to vote on the sufficiency of the amendments, isn't that literally the conversation that we're having?
The amendments to the bill, the technical changes to the bill. That's what we're voting to accept those changes.
And I'm telling you why you shouldn't accept them. I'm speaking on why you should not accept these amendments.
Well, I'm sorry.
That's directly what we're speaking on.
You don't get to have, this committee gets to decide whether we do. We're taking your opinions, and that's it. Your 2 minutes up. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
So we also had a bunch of election bills go through state agencies on the House side this week. Nothing super noteworthy. A lot of those bills, I think we've mentioned them before, they're like template bills from this national conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation. They have this election integrity scorecard for states. Election integrity, which is often like code language for restricting access to voting. So we already have some of the most restrictive voting laws in the country. We also have some of the lowest voter turnout in the country and some of the least engaged voters in the country. So we have kind of this perfect storm that basically like always plops us at the bottom of the list for people who vote. So I will say that a lot of these bills are kind of benign, like the fraudulent but non-existent absentee drop boxes. So some of these bills were passed through the House side without much fanfare or any issue. Again, trying to like get back up on that score for election integrity with this one group, which is kind of interesting, and really doesn't address any problems that we actually have with our voting system or our elections or anything like that. But there was a good bill that was proposed. It's a bill that would allow or create rather an online voter registration system through the Secretary of State's office. We are one of just a few states left in the country that does not have online voter registration. I mean, they have it in Florida, they have it in Alabama, they have it in Louisiana, Missouri, Oklahoma. I mean, if those states can do it.
If Missouri can do it, there's absolutely no reason we cannot.
So we're like one of like 6 or something states that have just like really held out. And the bill sponsor who ran it, Representative Andrew Collins, this was so interesting to me. He said that the first online voter registration system was set up in 2002. 2002, that is 21 years ago. This technology has been around. And so obviously it is a well-established system for registering voters. It's actually safer and more aligned with this idea of voter protection because it's electronic. You can keep up with this stuff a lot easier. You can quickly, like compare and contrast registrations with voter rolls. And so it's just really wild that we don't have this yet. This bill was also proposed in 2021 by then Representative Boyd, who's now Senator Boyd, and that passed the House with flying colors, and then it died in the Senate because of this one group called Conduit, who was stoking a lot of fear about voter fraud. Again, like not an issue in the state and also not an issue with online voter registration. So we expect this bill to pass. It got tabled in committee, I think, because one representative wanted to make sure that counties could weigh in on how this may affect, their registration systems. But again, like the Secretary of State's office is neutral on it. They had a representative there and said, like, yeah, the people who already do our voter registration already have this capability. We would just transition to their online format. It would be paid for by federal grants, so no state money would need to be diverted to pay for this. So fingers crossed that, we are not the very last state to implement online voter registration. It's great for people of all ages and abilities, all ages who are able to vote, of course. So hopefully this one gets through this year and we can, at least be as up to date as Alabama and Florida and Tennessee and Missouri.
Yeah, and before we move on, I do want to just point out that Mary Bentley was pretty adamant against it from what I saw, and at one point said something about, I think you tweeted this, Jenny, and then sent it to me and said it was for me. But at one point, she makes a comment about, you can just go to the DMV and register there. I went to the DMV Monday. I was there for 3 hours.
Yeah, girl, yes, you can. Yeah, that one's called Motor Voter, that system.
Yeah,
so you
Motor
go to
Voter.
DMV, and it's online in the sense that the person asks you at the DMV, are you registered to vote? And you say yes or no. And if no, they'll type it in for you. But they are transcribing what you're saying and typing into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And to Representative Collins's point, a lot of errors happen, but
Yes.
An actual online system, you can't go on to the next page unless you've got your information.
Right. And I mean, fun fact, when I first registered to vote, I went to the DMV to get my license, and I went to vote the next time that it was, whatever election was. It was some local election. I was not on the voter roll because there was an issue.
Sure.
So, had I been able to just go online and type in my information myself, I would have been able to vote for the millage.
I mean, maybe in Representative Bentley's county, the DMV is a breeze. And if that is the case, hats off to that DMV. But in my county and in your county, Hannah, that is.
And when I was in Grant County, when I first registered, it's not a big, the Grant County DMV is smaller than my apartment, and I live in a studio. So
yeah, that was pretty out of touch. Girl, nothing is easy at the DMV, and Hannah was gone for 1 million hours on Monday because she had to go. So
anyway,
so let's hope for online voter registration.
Yeah. Definitely. Before we move on from election bills, just real quick, the legislature has passed House Bill 1419, and that is we talked about it last week, I think, and then we had talked about it before too, but this bill is the one that changes the requirements to get a issue on the ballot. It takes it from 15 counties to
50
50.
signatures from, gotta get a certain number.
And that we actually, as the people of Arkansas, actually voted that down in 2020, I think. Was that in 2020?
It several times. Like any referred constitutional amendment from the legislature that messes with the people's right to the ballot and ballot proposals, like Arkansans overwhelmingly hate it. And we say that every time. And they keep trying and we keep voting it down. And now they're like, oh, well, what if we just sneak it in as a statute? No one will notice. It's just like that thing is going to have a lawsuit the minute it gets filed or the minute it gets signed by the governor. I don't know why they do this. Like, to make a point, I don't know. I wish honestly they would just say, like, we don't want our Arkansans proposing their own issues. We want to be the only ones doing it.
They want it. It's all about that power and control. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Really bites them in the butt sometimes, though. Ooh.
It does. I don't know. At some point, I'm gonna like actually calculate how much money was spent on like all of these lawsuits that we get hit with every session. I don't even know how to go about calculating that, but I mean, I want to know the number, and I think Arkansans want to know.
Yeah. I mean, God, yeah, that's something that Arkansans do need to know, is that like every time that, like, they have intentionally passed unconstitutional bills before, knowing that they will be challenged, and that Arkansas taxpayers foot that bill anytime our laws get taken to court. And we'll talk more about that later, just from like the balance of power perspective. Some like other kind of like, really, they did what news is that the Senate today passed Dan Sullivan's anti-affirmative action law. This like has been kind of steaming for a while now. Like, we've seen it in committee several different times, and I don't know. It's absolutely disgusting. And it ran in committee this week again. And then there was like some interesting things. Like, they were like, we can't, like, this is how we end discrimination, is by ending affirmative action. But then like immediately passed another law that like gives affirmative action type deference to fossil fuel companies and ammunition companies in the state. So again, like, not like what is even guiding this supermajority in the Arkansas legislature? I don't really know. Like, so far it seems like hate and spite and power and control are kind of the only guiding values. And on the Senate floor today, you know, Senator Sullivan presents this bill, and he was just like really defensive and like, well, all these things that people have said about me and my bill are not true. And this is about real things and real people's lives.
You know, Sullivan, when you run a bill that is like apparently racist, you're going to get called a racist. That's how that works.
I mean, like, and remember, this is the same guy who like took this bill to the Legislative Black Caucus and told them like, hey, why haven't you proposed a bill yet to end discrimination?
Yeah, we'll do another legislative rewind for that one. It deserves it because it's absolutely ridiculous. Time for a legislative rewind. Let's watch Dan Sullivan make a fool of himself in front of the Legislative Black Caucus. Enjoy.
Why hasn't the Black Caucus filed a bill to end discrimination? Well, if you talk about it all the time and you're discussing discrimination, it seems like the Black Caucus would at some point file a bill to end it or have a discussion. I just haven't heard that discussion either. I don't want to be rude, and this is your committee meeting. It's your people, and if he has more he'd like to say, go ahead.
Hold on.
Go.
I mean, my favorite part, I think, watching that video is Nicole Clowney's face. Because, like, you can see her face, you can't really see anyone else's, but it's just like jaw dropped. Like, what?
Yeah, we were all Representative Clowney when we saw
And then,
that
like,
video.
everyone just kind of starts anxiety laughing because, like, we don't, like,
That's right. That's
he
right.
said what? Like,
Exactly. He said what? And then he did what? Like, he actually ran this thing. He actually seems to, like, kind of believe in it. I don't know. Or I don't really know. We explore this in a blog post on our watch today. So you could go read that on our watch. Yeah, he said something really interesting. Quote, he said, everyone is equal and we will determine that based on your merit. So, like, are we equal? Are we not because of merit? I don't really know. Like, none of it made any sense. It doesn't make sense. What does make sense is facts and data that show us that there are groups of people who have been historically marginalized and oppressed and excluded. And in this case, affirmative action addresses those systemic issues in our public institutions by removing barriers to opportunity for these particular groups, people with disabilities, women, minorities, like
veterans.
Veterans.
Arkansas defines, like, minorities, and one of the definitions, or like one of the explainers, is veterans. So, like, what does that mean for, like, veteran programs?
Exactly. There are a lot of women in Arkansas, and there are veterans, and there are a lot of minorities, and there are a lot of people with disabilities. And so, like, that's what's so fascinating is, like, when the vote happened, it barely passed. 18 voted for, and I think like 12 against, and there were
18, 12. Yeah.
But, like, the 18 people who voted for it were all white dudes.
Shocker.
Old white dudes. Now, some of them are young, but the majority of them were old white dudes. And, like, all of the women voted against it. They voted to keep affirmative action in our state, state institutions, public institutions. All of the Black members of the Senate voted to keep it. And there were several Republican white men that voted to keep it too. And so, like, affirmative action clearly has bipartisan support, or at least support to not end it. And then, like, this gaggle of 18 just are like, well, discrimination isn't real. I've never been discriminated against, so it must not be real.
Yeah.
This is stupid.
And I do kind of want to talk about Senator Clark's comments. Like, we're not going to get super into it because he starts it off real bad, and I was kind of confused a little bit because I wasn't sure what he was trying to say, but he eventually got there. Particularly, he was speaking to his own experience as a white man, and how he talks about some business in Hot Springs where everyone wanted to work, and then, there was only one person that he graduated with that got to work there because they knew, like, they were family friends of someone there. And then he starts talking about, like, later on in his life, well, actually, before he even gets to that, he says, Senator Chesterfield, your family would not have been given an opportunity to work at this company. And he says it very matter of fact, and I love to see that. Like, I love to see it. And then he goes on to say, I started thinking about my own hiring practices. I looked at the people that I was working with, and I noticed that everyone I worked with was white.
Be still, my introspective heart.
Right. And at the end of his speech, like, the whole point was, I want to believe that discrimination does not exist, but it does, and it's apparent. And I, like, he himself was confused. Like, this is like we're watching a Republican white man implode right then. Because it's just like
awakening.
It was. And I, again, like, don't agree with a lot of what he said, but, like, the point that he was trying to make was accurate. And
that is valid and important. And like those are the kinds of experiences that I think these 18 white men who passed this terrible bill need to hear, is that like, listen, no one is trying to woke mob you into doing X, Y, and Z. Like, that's not what affirmative action is. Like, it's been around for a very long time, and it's in place for reasons. And all of these state institutions use it for a reason. There is value to it. Like when we give people, when we remove barriers to opportunity and more people can succeed and thrive, it is better for all of us. It's better for all of us. I mean, that's like one of the ways that we reduce crime and keep our communities safe, like, is by restoring opportunity to communities that have not had it, because they've been oppressed and marginalized and excluded. And so it's just, I don't know, it's just like, I don't know. It was wild. Anyway, it passed. Maybe the House will save us. I'm like super, super quickly going to talk about solar. Listen, also in the Senate, this was a Senate heavy week. I'm sorry for that, everyone. But in the Senate, they also ran this bill that would repeal a lot of our solar laws, or like mess with our solar laws. And like Arkansas has done this huge leap forward in solar. We're like a booming solar industry, and everybody's like super excited about it. And that's great. And probably saw all those commercials like a couple years ago about how you could like put them up in your house and get, I don't know, some kind of loan forgiveness or something. Anyway, all that to say, you know who doesn't love solar are the big utility companies who are not making as much money because of this. And so last session, they tried to run a bill. Some people tried to run a bill that would kind of like gut the solar industry and like tie the hands of the Public Service Commission, which is the regulatory body that like sets rates and, you know, basically tells the utilities to behave so that they're not like price gouging consumers. Fast forward, this is like the same vibe. It's the same vibe of like, hey, who's looking out for those big utilities? They're losing money. Now, to be fair, since more and more people use solar, the utility companies are required to purchase that, and like what they're doing is, because they're not setting their rates properly and adjusting for these solar owners, they're passing on costs to non-solar consumers. And so the proponents of this bill are framing it as like, hey, we're just looking out for consumers. And so as a result, we're going to, instead of giving solar owners a credit at full retail price, we're only going to give them a wholesale price. So solar owners would not get as much money back in a credit for their energy. But anyway, I don't actually want to talk about that, even though I can. What I want to say is it passed, and that's a bummer. Like, personally, I don't think this is a good idea. Like, but what I found really interesting is that the people who were arguing in favor of this bill that would support or benefit utilities more than anyone were using phrases like, you know what, somebody in rural Arkansas does not need to be footing the bill for some wealthy person in Fayetteville who wants to have solar panels. And I was like, wait, this sounds familiar, except opposite day when folks were like, hey, rural people shouldn't be footing the bill to send wealthy people's kids to private school in Fayetteville. And then they got up and they were like, we should not be we need to maintain this system because it's in the best interest of consumers, i.e. we need to maintain the status quo. And I was like, well, it's like the opposite of what we were hearing last week, which was like, down with the status quo, like don't support failing systems. Competition is good for schools. But in this case, they think competition is not good. They don't like competition from individuals who are exercising their individual right to install solar panels, generate their own energy. So it's just like this really wild, like Alice in Wonderland, where you've like crossed through the mirror, and now the supermajority is saying like the exact opposite messaging rhetoric of what they were saying last week. The only thing that has changed, in addition to the rhetoric, is like the topic. So like school choice, it's like personal freedom, all this stuff. Yes, yes, yes. No, down with the status quo. But then solar, it's like no to personal freedom, no to competition, keep the status quo, fund the system, not the solar. And all of that to say, that's demonstrative of, in my opinion, again, like what is guiding them? What are these principles at the core of the supermajority that are dictating policy, that are advancing some kind of goal for this caucus? Like there are none. There are none. They are serving their masters, who in these two cases are big utilities and school choice. And what those have in common are their special interests. They are big special interests in this state. They have a lot of money. They are good at lobbying. They are good at getting legislators in their pockets, puppeteering them. And that's really upsetting. It's really upsetting because they're not addressing problems. Yeah. They're not addressing problems. We want to see them do their jobs. Pretty sure that the people of Arkansas would agree with that, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say about solar.
I want to throw in here, like, Representative Wooten did an interview this week, I think, and it was about school choice, but I think his words are very applicable to like everything that's happening in the legislature. And he says something about 50% of the legislature supports Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and about 50% are afraid of her. And he said, that's my opinion.
Jim Wooten telling the truth.
But I
he's
mean,
gonna get called a liar on Twitter. I think he already has.
Oh, sure.
By Representative Ray.
Probably. But I mean, again, like, yeah, that is like Ray is a minion. Like, he's not, like, I don't think these people aren't acting of their own accord anymore for the most part. It's like they're getting their marching orders and they're going with it.
Right. Exactly. And that's not everyone, obviously.
Not everyone,
but the ones that are actually pushing these things through, like it's enough of the supermajority, which I guess you don't need a lot of a supermajority to get something done because math. But like that's the case. And that's something that I keep wanting to bring up because I want our audience to understand that it is really important to pay attention to the patterns that we see, or when there are patterns in contradiction, if that makes sense. I know that kind of sounds oxymoronic, but like if there is a pattern of them switching back and forth and using language that's directly antithetical to what they were using the week before, just as passionately, that's indicative of some ulterior motive, right? Something that's behind the intent of that policy that maybe regular Arkansans can't see. So we want to point that out to people. We want them to know that there are masters, that overlords, if you will, that are being served that are not the people of Arkansas. And Arkansans can do something about that. They can actually, they can ask tough questions of their legislators. And I know that like a lot of legislators got feedback on this solar thing, and a lot of them did not vote to pass this bill. So, again, bipartisan opposition to moving this forward. A lot of public pressure can lead to compromise and collaboration, and to more transparency in this process. You can go online and pull these candidates' financial records and see, hey, were there big PACs and lobbyists that gave money to them? Are some of them big energy companies? Are some of them school choice?
Yeah. So, like how in 2018, Breanne Davis was vehemently against using vouchers for private schools. And then this last election cycle, she was maxed out by Huckabee.
Yes.
And all of a sudden is for private schools getting vouchers.
So that's really interesting too, because I think that's the other theme. Like the big lobby special interest is always going to be a theme. Like that will be a theme in our state until our state is no longer a state, or until we have substantive ethics reform and campaign finance reform. But like until that happens, legislators are always going to be serving big lobby overlords. That's just period. That's it. What is different about this cycle, or what's an addition to this cycle, is the jockeying for position as Sarah Sanders's like teacher's pet. And so that is like really fascinating to me. And like, we could spend a whole nother like entire video / podcast conversation on this. And if anybody wants to talk about this with me, like please tell me, and you can come on, because like nothing gets me more excited than trying to figure this out. Like all of these young people like gunning for a spot, and like what they're dreaming of is like a future like White House cabinet. Like, I don't know. Are they hoping that she gets there and they take them with her? And then all of the old people who are like, wow, my time's almost done. Like the Jim Wootens and the Jimmy Hickey Juniors, like they know that she's not taking them anywhere. Like it's this millennial type, group that is really vying for a spot kind of next to her, like who gets to stand behind her when she has the Learns press conference, and like who's she gonna retweet?
Yeah.
And like who gets to be in that inner circle. And that has created this political environment of like completely bananas behavior. And kind of like, if you did have guiding principles, those have also been tossed, because now this is the big ticket in town, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, send me a message.
Forget who you are, because like you want a different position. Like that's
right. Like you've got like summit fever. Like you have, like you can only see what's ahead. And then what's in front of you is like the things that, we actually need to do for our state and for our constituents and our districts. But like, I can't, I'm totally focused on this one other thing. So, that's what I've been observing, and I'm completely obsessed with this, and would be happy to talk with anybody about it who wants to chat with me.
Yeah. All right.
What's next?
Well, I think we've kind of talked about most everything, but the last thing that we're kind of holding for the end, I think, is the hardest thing for us to talk about, or for me to talk about at least. We're seeing a very aggressive attack on trans youth in our state, and it started in 2021. And this year it's worse. I think at one point in 2021, I made a comment about like, I don't see how, like, what else can they do? And they found more things to do. So I think most of these bills we have talked about at length already. But I want to point out that this week, every day, and I'm counting the book banning bill, Senate Bill 81, as an anti LGBTQAI bill, because that's what it is. Their only goal is to ban books that show gay and lesbian and trans, like anything that's not straight. It's also anti-CRT. I mean, it's all around bad, but I am going to like put it in this subcategory, because every single day this week we have heard at least one anti-trans bill. Every single day. And every single day we have heard from mothers and pastors and trans youth come and speak and plead with the legislature to just leave them alone, to just let them be alive and who they are, and like be safe. Because these bills, not the legal ramifications are one thing, but I guess like some people have talked about it when they testified, but what the legislature isn't talking about, or at least the ones supporting these bills, is that this incites hate crime. I mean, I think Greg Leding mentioned it's the House Bill 1156. It's the school bathroom bill, which requires a student to use the restroom of the gender that they were assigned at birth, and also on overnight trips, room with kids the same gender, or sequester them. Basically, they can have a separate room. No idea how that's going to get paid for, but anyway, Greg Leding brings up a Harvard study that was done that says trans kids who live in states or areas that pass laws like this are 27% more likely to be sexually assaulted than in places that do not have laws like this.
God, that's outrageous.
So I don't know, this whole like theme of we're protecting children, we're protecting children. Well, last week you passed a bill that let 13-year-olds work in factories and be around chemicals that will alter their life forever. Forever. Like, I don't know. I just don't understand it. And it's hard.
It's because it's not about protecting kids. Like
Right.
there might be a few legislators who genuinely believe that. I think Mary Bentley being one of them. Like, she's very convicted about how she cares about the kids. She thinks that she is protecting people who have gender dysphoria, right? By putting all of these kind of authoritarian laws into place. Maybe we can like pray them out of it or whatever it is that she's thinking. I think the rest of them who go along with it, they could not, Dan Sullivan could not care less about that one bill. He was honest about it. He said, we just want to create a way for parents to be able to sue schools.
We know for a fact that Dan Sullivan doesn't care about kids because a child died at his daycare facility. So
say it louder.
Yeah, I'm like yelling right now. And it's just because
no, that's a really excellent point, Hannah, because I think there's probably not a lot of people outside of Senator Sullivan's district who know that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had his hand in policy that
lessens restrictions on daycare facilities.
And so when we talk about abuse of power, like, it's not just them wanting more control and wanting more power and wanting to retain that power. It is abusing power to harm Arkansans. And when you again and again and again and again target one very specific and small population of people in this state, that is intentional, it's cruel, it's the opposite of who we are as a state and as people. It's not loving your neighbor. It's hateful. It's absolutely hateful. And it ruins people's lives. And in some instances, people die because of it. And so, like, there are so many ways that you can, to your point, Hannah, like, break down these bills that are unconstitutional, that are sloppy in how they were written. And it's because it's all like, again, like, who wants lawmakers who are writing laws because they're motivated by hate or they're motivated by stoking a culture war because they care about staying in power? Like, that's appalling. That's absolutely appalling. And that is the state of our state right now. And like, I know a lot of people are going to hear this and they're going to feel like if they weren't already aware of these trans bills, which I think most of our audience probably is, but if some people are just now hearing about this, I think they'll probably feel really awful and hopeless. But it doesn't have to be this way. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. We've got to be engaged, and it can't be just the people who are being targeted who are engaged. Like, that is the takeaway. Like,
because they won't listen.
Exactly. And we should not have to wait. Like, you should not, whatever group you identify as, or like whatever it is, like, you should not have to sit around and wait for them to come for you. They will, like, they'll get there. And I think that's why so many people were outraged about the attack on public schools, because it's like, so many people go to public school. That's kind of a big one. But like, we need people to speak up and speak out. We need people, we need like Alan Clark's type people to be like, you know what? Yeah, that's not right. Like,
yeah,
people are discriminated against, and we do kind of need some of these things to make sure that doesn't happen, or that other people can get a shot. We need you to speak up if you're not trans, if you're not, whatever it is, whoever is being attacked by this really hateful legislation. And in this case, it is trans people and LGBTQ plus IA plus Arkansans. Like, you've got to get loud and say no, like, not in our state.
Yeah. And I could talk forever about this. Tuesday was a particularly hard day. We heard 3 towards the end of the day, I think I texted Jenny and I was like, I need you to take over because I'm sad. um but anyway, kind of I want to go back to, we need more Alan Clark, like those moments, which is like not something
Can you
we should
believe
be
those words are
saying.
coming out of me?
Yeah. But like those moments of like these conservative Republicans who are just like, this isn't necessarily what I actually have been standing for my whole life. I want to give credit where credit is due. And Senator Bryant got up and I think to most people, I was very surprised. He got up to talk against Senate Bill 270, which is the bathroom bill that essentially criminalizes being trans in public spaces and public restrooms in particular. But anyway, he starts off with just like, this is government overreach, which absolutely yes. And then towards the end, he makes a comment about I might not agree with the lifestyle or the choices of someone who is trans, but the people we're talking about in this legislation are adults, and they made these decisions themselves, and we as a legislature have no right to require someone show their birth certificate to use the restroom in public. So I do want to say, like, thank you for like standing up against this particular bill, because it's honestly it's one of the most egregious. And if it is passed, it's moving to the House now, but if it is passed, it'll be the only law in the nation like this. We'll be the first state. And I feel like we are constantly in the media for stuff like this.
Yeah. And yeah. And again, like, this is not to take away from how abhorrent and severely terrible these bills are because of the way that they target and attack and marginalize people who are already targeted and attacked and marginalized. Like, but I feel like if you are somebody who follows us, like you probably share these values with us, but maybe you have people in your life who don't. And like, if someone just like does not see how this is a big deal, I think like one way to bring them into this is to ask, like, is this sustainable for our state? Like, we are on this path to like cultural annihilation. We're like, are we going to have public schools in 10 years? I don't know. Like, I mean, we might not have a state income tax. Like, how are we going to pay for particular programs and services that people need and use in this state?
We are not a wealthy state.
Like, exactly. We are very low on the ranking in, well, a lot of things. Health, we are unhealthy. Unfortunately, we have very low economic mobility. It is hard for people to get out of the class that they're in. Doesn't matter how hard you try, like, you're likely stuck there. We have low education rates. We have high infant and maternal mortality rates. Like, the statistics are not good for our state. We have a lot of problems, and we know that because most people live that experience every day, right? Like, they lie awake at night wondering how they're going to pay for X, Y, and Z. Or maybe they can make ends meet, but they can't buy a house or take their family on vacation. They're stuck, and they do work really hard. Like, we're not just this like state of loafers. Like, Arkansans work really, really hard. And so just a question to pose for those who might not see how these culture war things are detrimental to Arkansas because they're not the target of these types of bills, is that it's making our state less and less attractive for investment. And like, we can't keep going like this. Like, we can, but like, what's going to be left?
Yeah. And, I don't know. It sucks feeling like I'm born and raised in Arkansas. I've lived in Fort Smith, Sheridan, Jonesboro,
every congressional district,
every congressional district. Like, I've been here. I've been committed to the state, And it sucks feeling like I don't belong here or like I don't fit in when it's not true. But when you spend every day watching the legislature and hear the rhetoric that they use, and like that rhetoric then gets pushed out to other Arkansans, who then turn around and use that same rhetoric without realizing that it is harmful. Like that sucks. I've spent my entire life here. I've spent my life working to better, like, not just my life, but like other people's lives, my family, my friends. And I don't know, like, there were points when I watched the legislature where I'm just like, man, if I could afford it, I would leave. And I hate that because I love Arkansas. Sorry, that was my I've been holding that one in for a while.
I mean, I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like we entered a time loop at some point. Like, we're just going backwards. Like,
yeah. It can feel hopeless. It's not, but it can feel hopeless.
Right.
And that is,
it's not, because we saw 1,000 high school kids walk out at the historic Central High School last week. Like, that's amazing and incredible, and that gives me so much hope. I just wish that, like, I don't know, I wish we had some 20-year-olds in the legislature.
Yeah. And like this, I don't know, maybe this is a separate conversation for a different day, like on the like right now we're like, for AR people, we engage, we equip, and we empower. And like, this is the education part. This is like the not fun part of communicating, like, what is the state of our state? The equipping and the empowerment part, those are the parts where you take the hopelessness and you take the fear and the frustration and you mold them into action and energy and effort and community, like we have seen with teachers.
And with trans Arkansans.
And with trans Arkansans. And like, you find your people. So if you feel isolated, this is a good start. We can help you get to the equipping part and the empowerment part. Like, those come next. And this is just the part that feels pretty gross, honestly. We're in this like 3 or 4 month bubble where a lot of bad things happen. We have really terrible policymakers who don't help us really get our lives better. And instead,
yeah. And what we can look forward to are all of these bills getting paused by the courts. They eventually go to court, because they will. Like, the medical malpractice bill is going to go to court.
That's right. It's yes. And again, like, one small way that you can like exercise the equipping and empowerment part is like to start very, very, very small. Like, start very, very, very small in your community, whether that's your town or your school or like whatever it is.
The dinner table.
Your audience, dinner table, exactly. And just like start asking people these things. I had a guy come fix my heater today. It was broken, and he lives in Bella Vista, and he's like a homesteader and like maybe an anarchist. I don't know. And we found like so much common identity and like, well, one, knocking on big utilities, because my heater was out, and that was like a natural progression of the conversation. But like, I learned that he and his wife, like, they want to be farmers. They want to farm bees and blackberries and sage, and they do, but right now they're stuck in the grind. They both work for this heating and air company. They've got a son who's 7 and, you know, on the autism spectrum and is deaf and is very special needs. And that's a full-time job. Anybody that has a special needs kiddo knows that is a full-time job in and of itself. He's in public school. They're getting him an IEP, but like, they need help. And he's like, if I could just get to this next spot, if I could just here. And And we had that conversation, and I asked him, like, what do you want to see from your lawmakers and representatives? And like, that was a very, like, I'm not trying, you don't have to evangelize people. Like, just ask them what they think. And if people think like, hey, I'm not political, you're not asking about national politics. You're not asking if they voted for Trump or Biden.
Right.
You're asking them like, hey, what's going on in your life? What is that like to farm bees? Well, I do it, but I would really like to do it full time, but I need this, this, and this before I can actually get there. And then that becomes a very natural way to engage with people on these small, not so small issues, but they may feel like they're small. And then you can help them see like, well, you know what, like, do you know who your state representative is? And like, well, okay, this dude like wanted to buy solar. And we had a whole conversation about this solar law. It was wild.
I love that.
Anyway, all that to say, like, there's opportunity to engage and to connect with people. And I think we share a lot of the same values. And we can just remember that the person you're talking to is a human.
Right.
Our lawmakers can also start there too, I think.
Right. I think our lawmakers should go back to school, specifically when we were taught active listening.
Also for civics too.
For civics, yes. But I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking about like the number of people who have gotten up in the past 2 weeks to speak against some of these bills, and like none of the, I won't say none, but most of the legislature just, choosing to turn their ears off and just, not really listen to it and push their own narrative afterwards. Or be like Dan Sullivan and like completely change someone's testimony and use it against them. He's so gross. We gotta get better people in office. And I think that was like the point that I was trying to get to, that I was doing a very bad job of getting to, is like, you can also start small by being those people in your local community, like run for JP, run for city council, board. And like my town, there are these boards and commissions that have at-large positions for the public, and like anyone can apply to be on them. And that's like a great way to like kind of dip your toe in the water and see like, is this really something I want to do? And just be active. Like, you don't have to be active about everything. Like, just pick the thing that you care about and be active on that. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Like we do, but that's our job. So right. Send us a cupcake. Yeah. We don't want anyone getting burnt out. We do the burning out so that you don't have to. It's our new catchphrase. We're going to put it on a shirt. Send coffee, SOS, and by Dr. Pepper. Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I know we didn't talk about every single anti-trans LGBTQ plus bill. Before we finish, I know it's a long video. Before we finish, I do want to go back to the libraries bill because it failed in committee. But Dan Sullivan has said that he is working on an amendment. Originally, I think he planned on running it today. It didn't happen. I don't think I watched it. I didn't see it. So it didn't happen. Maybe next week. I think maybe, I don't know if he's working on the amendment still or if he's just still trying to whip up votes. Because I believe after a bill has failed twice, it's automatically deferred. I believe that's how that works. I could be wrong, but just trying to wear him down. I'm just trying to wear him down. I mean, as many losses as we can give him. Like, bro really hates library. I mean, like, vehemently in his soul. And I'm just like, who hurt you? Like apparently a library. Like, oh my goodness. And I don't know. And this is a movement across the South, I'll say. Maybe across the nation, but specifically the South. Florida, for an example, Tennessee, for an example. I mean, like Jenny said earlier, most of these bills are cookie cutter bills that we're just copying and pasting, which I don't think is good governing, but that could just be me. Anywho, library bill failed for now. So we'll just add that to the list of failures from Dan Sullivan, and we'll take that as a win and use that to propel us into the next week.
Do you have like a whiteboard above your bed and it's like Dan's losses, and you get in bed and you just like do another notch of the column and you're like, oh, I'll sleep well tonight.
I will not deny or confirm.
Exactly what I thought.
Okay, y'all. I think that's it. If we missed anything, I'm so sorry, but we did the best we could this week. Again, I want to thank the high school students who came, because we gave you a shout out earlier, but y'all really made my week. So
Hear, hear. Good job, Central High.
Good
All right.
job.
See y'all next time.
Goodbye. Thank you for watching and/or listening to our weekly roundup of the 94th General Assembly here in Arkansas. Be sure to head over to our website, 4arpeople.org, to sign up for our weekly newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and listen to our brand new podcast. Once again, we are 4AR People,